Hey everyone, during this video we're going to learn about the other part of MLA citation, these bibliographic citations that we use to give credit to authors of other ideas and other work. So the whole point of citations, whether they are in text or bibliographic, is to give credit to authors of other ideas. Academic writing functions on this notion that we can use anyone's ideas that we want to, as long as we give credit to them for those ideas. So we have to be sure to always give credit to authors of other ideas and other work and other words. However, if we fail to do so, that constitutes plagiarism. That's something we want to avoid. So throughout this video, we'll talk about how we can do that. There are two different ways that we give credit to authors of other ideas. One of these, which we've already talked about, are through in-text or parenthetical citations. They're the same thing, just different names. The other way we give credit to authors of other ideas are through our bibliographic citations. So let's talk about those a little bit. To briefly review, in-text citations indicate authorship of an idea. These citations are located in the body of the text immediately after a borrowed idea. We won't see them at the end of a paragraph or at the beginning or somewhere in the middle of a sentence. They're always going to be at the end of a single sentence that includes a borrowed word or borrowed idea. In-text citations include a couple of things that we want to always make sure are there. These include our parentheses, the last name of the primary author, and the page or paragraph number to indicate which page or paragraph that quote or idea comes from. Now, there's a number of other special cases related to in-text citations, but we're not going to review those now. If you need a refresher on that, check back to the other lectures or any reading materials we have. In-text citations follow a basic format: parentheses, the author's last name, and a page or paragraph number. So if you look at this example here, we see the author's last name and then the page or paragraph number that the source appears on. We always use citations in conjunction with quotes and paraphrases. So even if we're not using the author's exact words, we still need to give them credit for their idea. So in this particular example, we notice we have "the sky is certainly blue today," though that is Jones's exact wording in his or her written text. So we give credit to him or her with that in-text citation. However, we notice here, this is a paraphrase. We notice we're not using direct quotes. This is our words. But the idea does not belong to us. The idea is that of Jones. So we still need to give credit to Jones for that idea. So even though we're using our own words, we still have our citation there. So bibliographic citations are a bit of a different thing. In-text citations really, on one hand, are in the text to indicate to the reader that they are reading someone else's words or ideas. However, there's a second goal and second function. In-text citations refer the reader to the works cited page or the bibliography of your own work. The works cited page and or bibliography includes the full bibliographic citations for all of the sources that you use during your research and your writing. So these bibliographic citations include three key pieces of information: authorship information, the title of the source, and any publication information related to that source. So all bibliographic citations have a standard format they follow. We think back to in-text citations, they also follow a similar format. Those in-text citations use the author's last name and a page or paragraph number. Well, in the case of bibliographic citations, we have three pieces of information. One, the author's name. 2, the title of the source, And 3 are publication information. No matter what we're citing, no matter what type of source it is, whether it's a book, an article, a film, a website, an email, they all will include those 3 pieces of information. So each one of those pieces of information are there to communicate a different type of information. So let's look at those and what they are. Authorship information indicates who wrote the source, who is the author. In a lot of academic writing, we'll find that sources don't have just one author. Many sources that we use will have been written by multiple authors. So in some cases we may have one author. So in the case of one author sources, in the bibliographic citation we're going to indicate that in this way. Now you notice one thing here. The last name comes first, the first name comes last. The reason this is done is for alphabetical listing. The very first name in every bibliographic citation is the last name first. So we notice in all the others, and we'll talk about these in a second, the other names in those lists are formatted differently. So we use the primary author's last name first just for organization and alphabetical reasons. So in cases that we have 2 or more authors, we organize this and format this a little bit differently. So for 2 author sources, we notice here last name first, first name last for the primary author. But now the second author of that source, we notice, uses their first name first and their last name second. So in the case of 3 author sources, we do something a little bit differently. Last name first, first name last for the primary author, then first name, last name, and first name, last name. In the case of sources that utilize 4 or more authors, and this is actually pretty common in academic writing, we're going to format that in an entirely different way. The primary author will be indicated just as always, just the same with one author, but we're going to include this little et al. Abbreviation here. All this means is and others. So let's look at some examples of correctly formatted author information. So in the case of one author, we have last name first, first name last. In the case of 2 authors, the primary author, Barb Jones here, is still the first listed because Barb Jones is the primary author. Her last name is first, her first name is last. However, the second author, Larry Desk, has his name first, last name last. In a third example, 3 or more authors, last name first, first name last, first, last, first, last. And then finally, in the case that we have 4 or more authors, we're just going to format that as the primary author here and et al. Here. So let's look back to our basic format for bibliographic citations. We remember that all bibliographic citations include 3 pieces of information: author, title, publication information. So now we know how to format author names. So in the case of a full citation, what we know so far is this part here. So last name, first name, et al. And just from reading this, we know that this particular source has at least 4 authors. So far, we don't know anything yet about title publication information, so let's not worry about that for now. When formatting titles, there's a couple of different ways we can do this. It's helpful to be aware that different source types have different title formats. A traditional way of looking at this is as books are always underlined. Any kind of periodicals or articles, for example, academic or scholarly journals, newspapers, magazines, so on, are used with quotation marks. Any other kind of short written work will use quotation marks. An easy thing to remember with italicization is that for film and just about everything else, there's a few exceptions to that we don't need to worry about right now, will be italicized. There's a fun trick to this though. Newer versions of MLA tell us that all titles, regardless of type, can be italicized. So we can italicize books, periodicals, any kind of short written work, any film, anything. We can italicize everything. So that actually makes our job pretty easy in terms of title formatting. So when we look at the basic format, back to this, 1 author, 2 title, 3 publication information. So far, we're familiar with authorship and titling. So just based on authorship and titling, we can tell who wrote the work and we can tell what the title of that work is. However, based on this information alone, we don't know what type of source this is. This could be a book, this could be a film, this could be any number of different things. The way we distinguish types of sources from one another is with the publication information. So we'll talk about that now. Publication information shows us what type of source is cited. There's a couple of key pieces of information in every piece of publication information. So that includes the publisher of the work, where that work was published in some cases, the date of publication, and whether or not that source is print or electronic. Now, with recent updates to MLA, the Modern Language Association realized that there was a need to distinguish between types of sources. So, with the advent of ebooks and academic research databases and those kinds of things, there needed to be a way to distinguish. So, within the publication information, we will distinguish whether or not our source is actually printed on paper or whether it was a digital download such as a PDF file. The important thing to remember with publication information is that there is a different way to cite every different type of source. The ones that we're going to cover will cover the most common types of sources we will encounter in our research projects. However, it's important to keep in mind that the list we're going to go through is by no means a complete list. There literally are dozens and dozens of other types of sources, so keep that in mind. The first type of source that we're likely to come across are books. So in the case of standard books, we'll follow a basic format. The author, the title of the book, and now the publication information. For books, we include the city, the publisher, the year, and whether or not that source is print or electronic. So we have those 5 pieces of information there. When we look at our example below, we have our author, Barb Jones, basic format. This book has 1 author, so we format it last name first, first name last. The title is Volcano Safety, so we know that all titles can be italicized. So now we'll follow this basic format here. So we need a city, we have our city, New York. We need this colon here, and then following the city and colon, we have our publisher. So here is Oxford University Press. Something to note that you'll probably encounter in your research is this UP abbreviation, both capital letters. The UP abbreviation simply stands for University Press. So now we need a comma, so we have our comma here, and we need a year. Here we go, there's our year. This year indicates what year the book was published in. So now we need to distinguish between print versions and electronic versions of this text, so we do that right here with print. So with standard books, we have the author, the title, the city, the publisher, the year, and print or electronic. Often we'll come across books that have an author but have also been edited or translated. For the most part, there's some similarities and differences between a standard book citation and an edited or translated book citation. So the first thing we need to do is indicate the author of the original book. So we do that here. We also need to indicate the original title of the book. We do that there. Now, this first mention of year is going to be the year that the book was originally published. Let's use one of Shakespeare's plays that was written back perhaps in the 1500s or 1600s. That's when it was originally published, so that's the year we're going to include. Now, the second thing we need to include where the differences begin is in this edited or translated part. So these two abbreviations here, ED just stands for editor, and trans stands for translator. So if our book was edited, we will simply use ED. If our book was translated, we'll simply use trans, the abbreviations of either. So, next in the citation, after the author, title, and year, we're going to include our editor or translator, and then the name of the editor or translator. We notice first name is first, last name is last. So, this part can be a little tricky because under city, publisher, year, print, electronic, this part applies to the newest edited or translated version. It does not apply to the original source itself. So this will be some kind of special academic edition, very likely. So, following our standard format, let's take a look at how this actually works out. So, we need the original author. So we have that here, Barb Jones. So we need the title of the original work, so we have that there. We need the year the original work was published, so we have that there. We need an editor or translator. Well, Volcano Safety was edited by Archibald Mouth. So there we have that there. So now, the next portion of this, the city, publisher, year, print, electronic, we remember that this applies to the editor's version and not the author's version. So from reading this, we see that in 2001, the original book was published. Archibald Mouth's edition was published in New York by Oxford University Press in 2011. And we use electronic to indicate that this book was a digital download instead of a print paper book. Another common source that we will use are academic and scholarly journals. These are a bit different than books. One thing we'll notice in common, though, is that like books, the author and title are the same. So we don't need to change that in any way. Oops. So instead, Instead, the publication information will be a little bit different. After the author and title of the academic or scholarly journal article, we're going to include the name of the publication. The name of the publication is going to be the name of the journal that published this particular article. So the next part that follows the name of publication is the volume number and issue number. Following that, in parentheses, we have the year, followed by a colon, the page range that the article appears on, and then indicating whether the article is print or electronic. So when we look at our example here, we notice that we need an author and a title. So we have Barb Jones, and then the title, Volcano Safety. So we notice the name of the publication is in italics, so we now have the Journal of Disaster Preparedness. So that's the name of the publication. We need a volume number and an issue number, so we have that 23.4. There's a volume number and issue number. In parentheses, we need the year of publication, so year, followed by a colon, then the page range. The page range simply indicates what pages the article appears on. So just from reading this, we know that Barb Jones's Volcano Safety article appeared in volume 23, issue 4 of the Journal of Disaster Preparedness on pages 33 through 47. We also know that this is an electronic source, so it was a digital download. Other common sources that we'll come across are magazine articles. So if we notice, the magazine article format is pretty similar to that of the academic or scholarly journal. In this case, we have our author and title, which remains the same as always. Then we have the name of the publication, which again remains the same. What's different is in this part here, month and year, whereas academic or scholarly journals utilize the volume.issue format, magazines instead use the month and year. So for a monthly magazine, it will come out, let's say for example, June of 2005. So that's the month, that's the year. Also, the standard format includes some kind of page range, which again is similar to the academic or scholarly journal. And finally, we have some indication of whether the source is print or electronic. So, we look back at the standard format. Let's look at an actual example of this. So we need an author. We have our author. We need a title of the article or the magazine article. We have that there. So we need a name of publication. So we have that, National Geographic, name of publication. So now we need a month and year in which the article will appear, so we have August 2003. We need a colon, so we have a colon there, and then a page range. So notice here, this is a little bit different. We notice that plus sign right there under or beside the 19. The plus sign indicates that the article appears on non-continuous pages. In the previous example, the article appeared on pages 33 through 47, for example. Well, that article was continuous. Every page between 33 and 47 was the same article. But in cases where you see this plus sign, that means that the article is not on continuous pages. This article may begin on 19 and run through 23, and then skip to page 47 and run through 76. So these pages aren't continuous. between pages 23 and 47, there's a big gap with other material in there. So it's not space efficient to include all of those page numbers there, so instead we're just going to include the plus sign. And so finally we need to indicate print or electronic, print. Newspaper articles are also very similar to magazine articles. In fact, there's only one key difference between them. So in newspaper articles, we need an author and title just like every other source that we've worked with so far. We need a name of publication, which is exactly the same as magazine articles and academic journals. Now, the place where they begin to differ is right here, is in this date. Since newspapers are generally published every day of the year, we need to indicate what day of the month that particular volume was published. So we also need to include a page range and whether or not the source is print or electronic. So let's look at an actual example of this. So we have our author here, we have our title, that matches up. We need a name of publication, we have that New York Times. And so now we need the date. One thing to notice in MLA citations, we do a day, we do a day, month, year format. So instead of saying, for example, February 3rd, 1999, it instead says 3 February 1999. And this is standard across all MLA formats. In any case where you need to include a full date, you will include that format, day, month, year, as opposed to month, day, year. So in the standard format, we also need a page range. So we have that. So let's look down here. One thing to notice in newspaper formats, newspapers don't use the same page number format that other publications do. Since newspapers come in sections, it's very common to see an A section, a B section, a C section, a D section, and so on. So to indicate different sections, we need to indicate different pages and sections, we actually use the letter associated with the section. And finally, we need to indicate print or electronic. There's our print right there. So we know that this is a print newspaper that was published on the 3rd of February 1999. It was New York Times. The article was Volcano Safety. It appeared on pages 3.1 to 3b. It was written by Barb Jones, and it was a print. So one thing that's often pretty confusing with MLA citations is how we actually deal with websites. There's a couple of different ways. So if we are citing an entire website, and if we're citing an entire website, we need to think of that website as if it were a book. So the entire website and different pages within it are just the correspondent of a book with different pages and chapters. That's how we want to think about the entire website. So let's look at the standard format for this, author and title of website. So the author stays the same. The title is just the name given to the website, not any article or chapter within it. So now we need a host or publisher of that website. So the host or publisher is quite literally the same as with books, as with articles, as with newspapers. Websites have publishers the same as any other type of source does. So whatever organization publishes that source, we need to indicate that here. So we also need to indicate a year. And something new that we haven't worked with yet is this web idea. Any type of web source that we cite, we won't use the ELEC abbreviation. We're actually going to use the word web. So following that, and this is particularly important, we need to include the date of access. The reason we want to include the date of access is because websites can and very often do change. So if you access a website today, it's very likely that that website will change very soon, maybe even tomorrow. So if you access a website today and then write about it, use a quote in your research project, and then 2 years from now someone reads that research project, there's a good chance that this website will look very different. So we want to include the date of access as well. So let's look at an actual example of this. So we need an author, we have the author. So now we need a title for the website. Well, the name of this website is Volcano Safety Online. The entire website is dedicated to volcano safety. We can think about this as a parallel in a book sense. So never mind the online part, ignore that. Let's just vanish that for a second. Then volcano safety, that could very well be a book. So we want to think about this in a sort of book sense. So we also need to include the host and or publisher of the website. Well, Barb Jones's Volcano Safety Online website is hosted by the Department of Geology at UVA, University of Virginia, and was published in 2010. We need to indicate web, so we do that here. We need to indicate a date of access, and so we access Volcano Safety Online on the 26th of March, 2012. So now, and what's becoming more common than entire websites are individual articles within a website. So we want to think about articles within websites as if they were articles in part of a magazine. So we think about that, that's their correspondent there. So the website includes a number of different types of information, and not all of them are directly related to the same topic. So that has a standard format as well. We need an author, we need a title of the article, we need the name of the website, we need the publisher of the website, the year, web, date of access. So when we look back to our actual example, we have an author, we have a title, we have the name of the website, name website here, we need the publisher of the website, we have that there. We need the year of publication there. We need web, we have that. And then we need the date of access. Date of access there. One thing that's very important to remember is that in bibliographic citations for websites, if you notice both with article within a website and with entire websites, you'll notice something's missing. We don't use web links at all in bibliographic citations. In some specific cases, your teacher or your instructor or your professor will require that you include web links with your citations, and in that case that's fine. But in other words, we don't use web links unless we're asked to. And in absolutely no circumstance does a web link substitute a bibliographic citation. So never use a web link unless you're asked to, and if you are asked to use a web link, don't use that instead of a citation. So now, more and more common now are research databases. For the most part, I think we will get just about all of our research from one of the databases we have access to. So we need to figure out a way to cite, to indicate that we borrowed a source and that source was provided by a database. So we do this first by citing the source normally. So if we have an electronic book, we cite that as a normal book. If we have an academic article, we cite that as a normal academic article. But the thing we're going to do that's a bit different is add a special tag at the end of the publication information. And this tag includes these three pieces of information here: the name of the database, web, and date of access. So if you'll notice, in these three examples here, we have the same standard book format, but we need to add name of database, web, date of access. So Academic Search Premier, web, 11th of April 2012. So we have here a standard edited book, but we notice we need name of database, web, date of access. We have all that right there. And so we have a standard format for an academic article, and we have name of database, web, date of access. In some cases, you may use films as a source, and films can include anything from actual movies to documentaries to brief films that you see on YouTube, such as the one you're watching now. So these have a particular format that's a little bit different from the others that we've worked with. We notice the title of the film is first. Then we see this DIR abbreviation here. That just stands for the director of the film. In most cases, and as far as MLA is concerned, the director of the film is the closest thing that film has to an absolute author. So we have another part here, PERF. This just stands for performers. So as part of the citation, we're going to include the director, the main performers, the production studio. We want to think of the production studio as the publisher of that particular film. And finally, the year of publication, the year the film was released, and then the word film. So let's look at an actual example of this. So we have the film, we need a title of a film, so we have Chopping Mall. We need a director, so directed Jim Wynorski. We need performers, performs Kelly Maroney, Tony O'Dell, and Russell Todd. We need a production studio, Concord Pictures. We need a year, 1986. We need a film. And so that covers most of the common bibliographic citation types that we'll come across. So just to recap, all bibliographic citations have three parts: always an author, always a title, always a publication information. But the author information will always be formatted in exactly the same way, no matter what type of source you're using. The title information will always be formatted the same, no matter what type of source you're using. The only thing that changes is the publication information, and every single type of source you use has a different and unique way of indicating ownership of that particular source.